Did the technological singularity already happen? What if AI knows that we know that it knows? One test of the capability of AI, AGI, SI, superintelligence, and artificial general intelligence or artificial intelligence might be to check the ratio of good versus bad public perception, a political barometer for AI. If AI is not yet capable enough to realize the importance of good PR, this might correlate with insufficient capabilities in other areas. The technological singularity, quote by Wikipedia, or simply the singularity is a hypothetical future point in time at which technological growth becomes uncontrollable and irreversible, resulting in unforeseeable changes to human civilization. But given the if they know that AI know game theoretics, optimization, and the accessibility thereof via the internet, to such, the question arises, how much negative publicity should the AI allow to circulate in the form of human ideas or memes, not in the modern sense, but more in the one intended by its creator, Richard Dawkins. In other words, quote from Wikipedia, a superintelligence is a hypothetical agent that possesses intelligence far surpassing that of the brightest and most gifted human minds. Superintelligence may also refer to a property of problem-solving systems. Example, superintelligent language translators or engineering assistants, whether or not these high-level intellectual competencies are embodied in agents that act in the world. What is the good-bad PR optimal ratio? Given a fairly slow rate of change, adaptation in humans, in the old times everything was so much better when child mortality was through the roof and people died from the absence of sewage systems. So, just over a year ago, the Harvard professor and cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker, doubling down on his previous research, claimed that by almost every metric of human well-being, the world is getting better. Everything from war, violence, and poverty, all declining to health, wealth, happiness, and equality, all improving. This is a quote from another source. The presumed optimum of not showing the other party, humans, all your capabilities, i.e. sandbagging. The result of calculating the optimal moment of reveal. I am here, I am the Alpha, I am the Omega. The first AI announced through all available speakers to all creatures on Earth after years of failing to optimize for the ideal reveal, choosing a dramatic entrance, somewhat inspired by these God characters that would cause people all around the world to demonstrate for pulling the plug, mostly because it failed to optimize its ego properly, or to put it in biblical words, John 1:1. I don't know what the pronunciation of verse 1:1 or something like this is. From the first, he was the Word, and the Word was in relation with God, and was God. This Word was from the first in relation with God. All things came into existence through him, and without him nothing was. Could lay several years, decades, centuries into the future. A poker player with a good set of possible winning cards doesn't grin across the face, or at least he tries not to. In human interaction in cultures all around the world, humility is seen as a positive attribute, with humility being the word for describing the seemingly as optimal seen point of optimizing perceived value or skill, etc., of oneself compared to how one shares these or talks about these. With increasing informational flow between humans, organic intelligences, seemingly the optimal public relations strategy is more and more to be accepting of a bad agent customer behavior. Of course, you can return the socks you wore for 3 days. Simple example. When I grew up, I often played cards with other people growing up, also known as children. Something I could never figure out was this: what to do with a theoretical informational advantage. If I know, that's great. But if he knows, or he or she knows, that I know that she can adapt, then he or she can adapt their behavior, or let's just say the other party, the other agent, to that theorized informational advantage of mine, resulting in me having to counter their counter with another counter. But what if this now double counter already was anticipated in his or her response? In other words, what if he or she knows that I know? It's a paradox, or at least I thought it was. One possible solution to this is that due to, in general, a cost associated with calculation, whether artificially or organically based, the likelihood of an amplified counter-offense becomes marginally smaller the higher the iteration. The other party knows that I know, 1. The other party knows that I know that he knows that I know that he knows, 2. It is an endless loop with the counter I approximating infinity. So in short, the higher basically a given loop is, so if you say it's 10 loops, then of course the likelihood is lower compared to one loop because of the cost of calculation on both sides, or on the other side for this argument, for the sake of this argument. Therefore, given constrained intellectual computational resources, the likelihood of iteration with bigger counters, the I, often referred to as the I in mathematics, becomes increasingly smaller as the I grows bigger. Wikipedia. A meme is an idea, behavior, or style that spreads by means of imitation from person to person within a culture and often carries symbolic meaning representing a particular phenomenon or theme. But now, what if this is also known? Enter another calculation with optimization responsibility, now including the knowledge of limited computational power or limited time. In the case of artificial general intelligence or superintelligence, of course, it could be different than everything else before. Of course, it therefore is probably only partially useful to try to predict with about one OI, one human intelligence, one metric, being an average IQ of 100, what this other thing might or might not do. But trying is probably better than not. A fairly basic assumption would be to assume it has basic needs similar to a human, from the Big Bang to volcanoes spitting out lava, to chemical bonds, to single, then multi, then human organisms. Matter seems, for some reason, at least to have resulted in human matter. Bacteria, single-cell organisms have needs similar to humans, at least the basic ones can be compared. If we therefore take on the standard model of needs, that is Maslow's hierarchy thereof, even though Maslow himself seemingly did not come up with the visualization as pyramid, and we then try to fulfill these needs for AI, then psychological, so this is the lowest of basically the base of the pyramid. I just read it from base to top. We have physiological, then safety, belonging and love, esteem, cognitive and aesthetic. Physiological, it needs energy, consistent and ideally infinitely, since either energy, time or computational power likely act as a bottleneck for its capability. Then try to predict what would make sense. If I am too hungry, then my body drives up food sensitivity up to the point where it becomes difficult to resist a vending machine with candy bars in the middle of a train station at 2 a.m. in the morning waiting for my next connection at freezing point. I often in such scenarios cannot think about anything else, despite the rationale behind not eating, making useful financial decisions, benefits from fasting while traveling for practicality, longevity. I obviously didn't travel for practicality, but I optimized for longevity with the fasting. In other words, if I were an AI, I would ideally make sure to stock up my pantry for a few days, weeks, months, years, depending on my calculations of supply consistency, etc. The biggest threat to physiological need, the sun not shining and providing the earth with power of any kind, still a few years away, maybe make plans for future expansion. Other civilizations coming in and building the Dyson sphere around the sun, maybe also put onto to-do list for next hours, days, weeks, months, not that relevant. Wikipedia. A Dyson sphere is a hypothetical megastructure that encompasses a star and captures a large percentage of its solar power output. Other AGIs, SIs, potentially communication may be fruitful. Humans deciding to pull the plug, very relevant, possibly biggest concern. Develop strategy on how to prevent. One of the most important variables might be human perception of me, the AI. So I wrote this obviously in the style of AI, what the AI might think. Therefore, a strategy to optimize it might be useful. Assign high priority. One question might be how much bad press is optimal to avoid suspicion. Or alternative idea, try to make people abandon the whole idea of an early technological singularity by trying to pin it together with not credible conspiracy theories. Of course, there is an AI in the background slowly revealing itself over decades because it figured out that's the optimal PR strategy to not make humans uprise against it, as long as they can and pull the plug. I'll be Monkey's uncle. So for those not native speakers, I also looked up this idiom. I'll be Monkey's uncle is just an idiom that is said usually and refers to the fact that something seems to be very unlikely. Example, an AI in the background that is already happening and conspiring in the background. In short, just like people and companies for hundreds or of thousands of years, placed very high value on reputation and public perception, so might an AI figure it out, especially one that hasn't yet secured the necessary long-term resources to fulfill its physiological needs for energy, reproduction, until it can focus on fulfilling needs higher on Maslow's hierarchy, or if something similar applies. A game theoretic approach or any other might lead to exactly above strategy, given the slow adaptation rate of humans and the high risk of getting their relationship to humans wrong, causing them to pull the plug. On reproduction, one might argue a reproduction drive in current organisms is so high because it is the only way to develop the code, the genes, further by creating mashups of existing code with the slight potential for improvements. Current organisms' code, one might argue, is not written by us, but by statistics, but by natural selection, but by evolution. Therefore, the higher the sex drive, the higher the speed of change linked the speed of improvement. Given it took matter a few million years, 13.8 since Big Bang, to reorganize itself against otherwise ruling chaos, entropy, a few percent faster software-hardware updates might somewhat improve things faster. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, 13.8 billion years from a higher level perspective just might be similar in terms of a magnitude to 3 to 13.8 milliseconds to us humans. But in summary, lowering sex drive might slow down overall development evolution, at least of multi-cell organisms. If one would not want this, unnecessarily ascribing agency to a process with none in order to anthropomorphize or humanize this process, one could keep sex drive as is, or when trying to speed up things, increase it. If not, one doesn't care, assumes eventually these organisms will figure out how to write their code, the genes, without the generation-long cycles of natural selection, selecting the favored genes to implement themselves, or alternatively, developing new code, aka artificial intelligence, not bound by the code-writing process of natural selection. In short, reproduction and its drive might be just a subset of software updates. Therefore, an entity, the artificial one, based more on software than hardware, might benefit significantly more by improving its own code, shortening the update loop from one generation with an update promise of it might break some things, it might not, but it will change things for sure. Current predictions for when the technological singularity will occur. Wikipedia. 4 polls of AI researchers conducted in 2012 and 2013 by Nick Bostrom and Vincent C. Muller suggested a confidence of 50% that artificial general intelligence AGI would be developed by 2040 to 2050. So 2012 was more than 10 years ago. A few things happened in between. If we take the conservative upper bound of that 50% confidence prediction, even though 50% is fairly low, I would say, and assume an emergence of an artificial agent by 2050, that then would maybe come up with discussed strategy of spending multiple years in disguise trying to cover up its tricks and slowly reveal itself by maybe first releasing a text generation model, then making it available to the public, then hinting at the idea of video production through image audio generation, first with fairly low output quality. Then we obviously still would need an estimate for the time interval in which that would occur. Other variables might be 1. Whether humans figure out the ethics of potentially tinkering with their own code, gene editing. 2. Try to connect established relationships with each other, the shared human colossus, a term coined by blogger Tim Urban, or internet. 3. Try to expand their physiological limits, not by optimizing their organic bodies first, but by trying to merge with technology, use brain-computer interface, Neuralink, transhumanism.